Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into some pretty challenging source material, stuff that really questions the standard history we all learned.
Right, the sort of textbook version versus what might have been happening behind closed doors in, secret meetings.
Exactly. Our aim here is to look at research suggesting major world events might not just be random.
Yeah.
That they could be part of a bigger plan orchestrated by, well, a specific group of people.
It really boils down to a fundamental question, doesn't it? Is history just chaos, or is there some kind of intentional planning, cause and effect, shaping things? And you feel it today, right? The sort of general unease lots of people have about where things are headed. The sources we're looking at argue that feeling isn't just paranoia, it's maybe a response to an underlying system.
A system with real financial teeth, too. I mean, one claim in these sources is pretty stark. It suggests that, effectively, you work for the government for almost half the year through taxes, both visible and hidden.
Yeah, and when you compare the total tax burden now to, say, the British tax on tea that sparked the American Revolution, well, it makes that tea tax look tiny, like pocket change, really.
So yeah, the stakes are high. What we're doing today is unpacking the research on this, architecture of influence. We're focusing on three main things.
Okay.
First, the organizations themselves, the names that pop up like the CFR, Bilderberg, Skull and Bones.
Right.
Second, the money side, how the Federal Reserve actually came about, its controversial origins.
Always follow the money.
And third, what these sources claim is the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
This idea of a centralized global order may be achieved by controlling conflict, controlling sovereignty.
It's a massive undertaking.
It is. But before we dive in, just a quick reminder for everyone listening, you can follow our full analysis on Substack at theofficialurban.substack.com.
And we do live threads on X too, right?
Yep. Follow at officialurbanus on X for those. Okay, so let's start with the architects, the controllers, the word conspiracy itself. It comes from Latin conspira, just means to breathe together.
And the sources really stress that point. Secrecy itself isn't inherently bad. Lots of things are secret for good reasons.
Sure.
The key thing, the distinction they draw, is the intent behind the secrecy. Is it being used to gain unfair advantage, undue profit, or control? Like, the claims about suppressing technology or even, more controversially, stirring up wars. That's where they argue scrutiny is essential.
And when you look at the research on wealth, the idea of an oligarchy doesn't seem so far-fetched based on the numbers they present.
No, it doesn't. What kind of numbers are they talking about?
Well, they often bring up a Federal Reserve study from 1983. Now, that's a while ago, but even then, it showed just 2% of U.S. families controlled something like 54% of the nation's wealth.
Wow, 54% from just 2%.
And this small group, the sources just call them, sometimes the claim is they keep a tight grip on major industries, energy, medicine, manufacturing, partly by, well, maybe holding back new tech that could challenge them.
Okay, so that identifies the wealth concentration. But how do the researchers link that 2% to like an actual organized group, not just rich families acting alone?
Right. They connect the dots. They trace the families, mostly the men. Actually, the sources note very few women in these core groups to specific, often interconnected secret societies.
Like Skull and Bones?
Skull and Bones, yeah. The Illuminati comes up, Knights of Malta, and then, crucially, outward-facing policy groups, like the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. That's a big one.
Okay, the CFR. Let's trace that. Where did it come from?
According to this analysis, modern globalism really gets traction with the CFR. It starts right after World War I at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. American and British delegates there decided they needed an Institute of International Affairs.
Okay, so two branches.
Essentially. The British one became the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House. The American one became the CFR. And the stated goal, right from the start, was apparently to steer public opinion towards accepting, well, global structures.
But the actual blueprint, the idea for this kind of structure, the researchers argue it was laid out earlier.
Yeah, years earlier, by Colonel House, President Wilson's main advisor. He actually called himself a Marxist socialist. And in 1912, he wrote this novel, Philip Drew, Administrator.
A novel?
Yeah, but it wasn't just fiction, according to these analyses. It supposedly outlined a specific conspiracy. Get this. Establish a central bank, bring in a graduated income tax, and get control of both political parties.
Wow. Okay, so he writes this in 1912.
And the really striking thing for researchers looking back is that within just 2 years, boom, those goals are pretty much achieved, especially with the Federal Reserve Act in 1913.
And the Fed itself, the sources claim that was planned in secret too, right? The Jekyll Island meeting?
Exactly, 1910. Super secret meeting at J.P. Morgan's private resort on Jekyll Island. That's presented as Exhibit A for this being planned, not accidental.
And the mechanism. How did it give them control? Congressman Lindbergh warned about it back then, didn't he? Said it was the most gigantic trust on earth.
He did. And he also warned, more chillingly, that depressions will be scientifically created. That's the key phrase.
Scientifically created how? What's the mechanism they point to?
It's the power to control the money supply. Contracting it, expanding it, setting interest rates. Power that used to belong to Congress.
Right.
The sources argue that the architects, guys like Paul Warburg, who was kind of the mastermind, and the banker Benjamin Strong, they can now basically engineer booms and busts.
Which means if you're on the inside, you know when to buy low and sell high.
Exactly. Generating huge profits, consolidating wealth within that tiny elite. It's presented as deliberate design, not just market forces.
Okay, so they consolidate financial power. How do they maintain that control and keep it out of the public eye? You mentioned interlocking directorates earlier. And secrecy.
Yeah, Walter Rathenau, who ran GE in Germany, said way back in 1909 something like 300 men who all know each other direct the economic destiny of Europe. It points to this tight network.
A small circle.
A very small circle. Let's look at a couple of the modern groups mentioned that seem to act as policy channels. First, the Trilateral Commission. Founded in 1973. Private citizens. Japan, Western Europe, North America.
Supposedly for closer cooperation?
Right, but critics immediately jumped on it, saying it looked more like collusion, pushing towards a one-world government setup.
And the link back to the CFR, was it strong?
Immediate and direct. The research shows all 8 of the founding North American members of the Trilateral Commission were already members of the CFR. It's like a global extension cord for CFR influence.
Okay. Then there's the Bilderberg Group. That one's even more secretive, isn't it? From the 1950s.
Absolutely. Agenda, secret. Membership list, secret. Though attendees who've been identified include huge names.
Yeah.
George Bush Sr., Margaret Thatcher.
Right. There was that quote from a journalist covering one of their meetings.
Jim Macbeth, yeah, from The Scotsman, covering the 98 meeting. He noted the insane security and quoted someone saying, basically, anyone coming near the hotel who didn't have a stake in controlling the planet was turned away.
Controlling the planet. That's blunt.
It's provocative, for sure. But let's go even deeper to the most exclusive inner circle the research talks about. Skull and Bones, Yale. Founded 1832. How does a college society connect to global power?
Well, researchers point to symbols first, the skull and crossbones emblem itself. They draw links to the Illuminati, some even calling bones the Illuminati in disguise.
Okay, symbolism, but structurally.
Structurally, the research focuses heavily on the bloodlines, the continuous intermarriage among the key founding families, Harrimans, Whitneys, Rockefellers, names like that.
So keeping it in the family, literally.
The sources suggest it functions almost like an informal eugenics project, preserving financial and political dominance across generations within this network.
And maybe the clearest example of this network protecting itself, according to the sources, is the BCCI scandal. We should probably quickly recap that. What was BCCI?
Sure. Bank of Credit and Commerce International collapsed spectacularly in the early 90s. Massive fraud, money laundering for dictators, terrorists, illegal arms deals, a real cesspool.
And the Skull and Bones connection.
When the investigation started looking into criminal ties involving the bank, the Senate subcommittee handling it was led by Senator John Kerry, a bonesman. And the investigation touched on individuals linked to President George H.W. Bush, also a bonesman. Despite uncovering really clear evidence of widespread crime, the investigation just sort of petered out. It foundered, as the reports say. For researchers, that's Exhibit B, the elite, shielding their own, making sure the network stays above the law.
That protective layer is crucial. And that brings us to the media, the knowledge filter, as some sources call it. By the late 90s, the claim is that just 10 companies controlled almost all U.S. mass media.
Yeah, and if you take those 10 companies, look at their boards, their executives, their top editors, and then cross-reference with membership lists for the CFR and the Trilateral Commission.
You find a lot of overlap.
Significant overlap. Leadership at CBS, NBC, ABC, the New York Times, even prominent anchors like Dan Rather, Barbara Walters. The research argues this is why you get the conspiracy of silence around things like Bilderberg meetings. They're not going to report critically on the groups their own bosses belong to.
Stuart Alsop, the columnist, put it well, knowledge is power.
Exactly. What these groups know, and crucially, what they manage to keep you from knowing, That absolutely can hurt you. What you don't know can hurt you.
Okay, so we've seen the claims about financial consolidation, institutional control, media filtering. How do the sources tie this history to modern geopolitics? Specifically, the idea that wars aren't just tragic accidents, but maybe engineered.
This is probably the most explosive part of the research. The key document cited over and over is the report from Iron Mountain, highly controversial, published in 1967.
And who commissioned it?
It was started by people high up in the Kennedy administration, many of whom, notably, were CFR and Bilderberg members, McGeorge Bundy, Robert McNamara.
Okay, and the conclusion they reached, it's pretty dark, isn't it?
It's stunning. They basically concluded that war isn't some breakdown of the system. War is the basic social system. It's the main organizing force in society.
Wow, the basic social system.
Yeah. And the reasoning they gave, the core logic, was that the war system cannot responsibly be allowed to disappear.
Why not?
Because the threat of war, even if not actual war, creates this sense of external necessity. And the report argues that without that constant external threat, no government can really stay in power long term. It justifies huge spending, keeps populations in line, validates the state's authority.
So if war is necessary to maintain the state, the logical conclusion, if you want to eliminate war,
is that you inevitably have to eliminate national sovereignty, the traditional nation-state itself. That's what the report explicitly implies.
that's a heavy conclusion. Do the sources point to specific wars as examples of this kind of manipulation?
They do. Vietnam is a major one. President Kennedy was against sending in ground troops. He clashed with his own advisors, many of whom were CFR members, Rusk, McNamara, the Bundy brothers. The pressure campaign, reportedly spearheaded by CFR heavyweight Averell Harriman, pushed for removing South Vietnam's President Diem. Diem was assassinated, and then came the massive escalation of the war under Johnson.
Okay, Vietnam. What else?
The first Gulf War is another case study they dissect. Leading up to it, billions in loans, nearly $5 billion, went to Saddam Hussein through an Italian bank, BNL. The sources claim the Bush senior administration knew about this. Then you had Ambassador Glaspie telling Saddam the U.S. had no opinion on his dispute with Kuwait right before the invasion. A very strange green light, or at least not a red one.
And then Bush Sr.'s stance hardened dramatically.
Yes, reportedly right after a meeting with Margaret Thatcher, who was a Bilderberg attendee. And the famous line in the sand drawn to protect Kuwait also happened to protect oil fields where companies linked to his son, George W. Bush, had interests.
Although W denied having stock right at that moment.
Correct. He denied having Harkin stock at the time of the invasion. But the confluence of events, the loans, the diplomacy, the family connections, the sudden shift after meeting a Bilderberg figure, it all looks highly suspicious to these researchers. Pattern recognition.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? From the Fed's creation to modern wars, they see a thread of coordinated planning, driven by finance and politics.
That's the core argument running through all this material.
Okay, let's try and boil this down. The four sort of bombshell claims emerging from this deep dive into the source material. What are they?
All right, first, the assertion of a small, interbreeding, you could say, oligarchy that controls a vast, disproportionate amount of global wealth and key resources.
Okay.
Second, these elite policy groups, CFR, Trilateral, Bilderberg, they allegedly create global policy that often sidesteps democracy and becomes law, shielded by a media system that's deeply intertwined with them.
Right.
Third, the argument that major historical events, especially wars, show signs of being deliberately manipulated, starting with the Fed through Vietnam, the Gulf War, manipulated for profit and political control by these connected groups.
And fourth, the endgame.
Fourth, the ultimate goal, articulated in documents like the report from Iron Mountain, is potentially the management of conflict itself to justify state power, eventually leading to the erosion of national sovereignty for some form of centralized global control.
That's a lot to take in.
It really is. And the whole structure, if it exists as described, relies on one crucial thing: public ignorance, people not knowing, not paying attention.
Need to stay in the shadows.
Exactly. Their power lies in being unknown, their methods unseen. But what the research also suggests is that the information is out there now. The connections, the documents, the patterns, it's becoming more accessible every day.
So the power dynamic might be shifting. Their strength is in their small numbers and our lack of awareness.
But the ultimate truth, maybe, is that knowledge really is power. Just understanding how the game might be played, that's the first step towards, well, maybe changing the rules or at least not being played by them.
You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free.
Right. That's the quote. If these ideas, these claims from the sources have struck a chord with you, definitely check out the full deep dive. We link to the documents and lay out the arguments in detail on the official urban.substack.com. Subscribe there.
And please, share your thoughts on this. We really want to know what you think. Find us on X at @officialurbanus and use the hashtag #UrbanOdysseyTruth. Let us know your take. We'll be back soon for another deep dive.